The truck driver noticed. Something was wrong when the boy showed his arms. The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when Marcus Thompson pulled his 18-wheeler into the parking lot of the Golden Spoon Diner, a modest establishment nestled along Interstate 40 in rural Oklahoma. The chrome details of his Peterbilt 579 caught the early light, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Marcus had been driving for nearly 16 hours, pushing the limits of what his body could handle, and his eyes burned with exhaustion. At 52 years old, Marcus had seen more miles of American highway than most people would in 10 lifetimes. His weathered hands, calloused from years of gripping steering wheels and securing cargo, told the story of a man who had dedicated his life to the open road. The deep lines etched into his face spoke of countless sunrises watched through a windshield, of coffee consumed in gas stations across 48 states, of conversations with strangers who became friends for an hour before disappearing into the rearview mirror. He killed the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden silence, listening to the ticking of the cooling motor. The cab still smelled faintly of the pine air freshener his daughter had given him last Christmas, mixed with the ever-present scent of diesel and the remnants of the breakfast burrito he had eaten somewhere around Amarillo. Through the bug-splattered windshield, he could see the diner's neon sign, flickering uncertainly, its promise of hot coffee and home-style cooking beckoning him inside. Marcus grabbed his worn leather jacket from the passenger seat and climbed down from the cab, his knees protesting with familiar pops and cracks. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of dried leaves and distant rain. He stretched his back, feeling the vertebrae realign after hours of being hunched in the driver's seat, and took a deep breath of the cool morning air. The parking lot was nearly empty at this hour, save for a few other trucks, whose drivers were likely inside, seeking the same respite Marcus craved. A beat-up Ford pickup was parked near the entrance, its bed filled with what looked like farm equipment. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded, its mournful call echoing across the flat Oklahoma landscape. Marcus walked toward the diner, his boots crunching on the gravel. The building itself was a classic roadside establishment, the kind that had been serving truckers and travelers since the days when Route 66 was the main artery connecting the coasts. Its white-painted cinder-block walls were yellowed with age, and the windows displayed hand-painted specials that probably had not changed in decades. As he pushed through the glass door, a small bell announced his arrival. The interior was warm, filled with the comforting sounds and smells of a working kitchen. A long counter ran along one side, its surface worn smooth by countless elbows and coffee cups. Red vinyl booths lined the opposite wall, their seats cracked but clean. The floor was checkered linoleum, scuffed in the high-traffic areas but recently mopped. A waitress in her 60s looked up from behind the counter and offered Marcus a tired smile. Her name tag read, Doris, and her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun. She had the look of someone who had spent her entire life in this diner, who knew every regular by name and could recite the specials without looking at the board. "Morning, honey," she said, her voice carrying the distinctive twang of the region. "Sit anywhere you like. Coffee?" "Please," Marcus replied, his voice rough from disuse. He had not spoken to another human being in nearly 12 hours. "Black, strong as you can make it." "That's the only kind we serve," Doris said with a knowing wink. Marcus chose a booth near the window where he could keep an eye on his truck. It was a habit born from experience, from the early days when cargo theft was a constant concern. Even now, with GPS trackers and improved security, he could not shake the need to maintain visual contact with his rig. As he settled into the booth, the vinyl squeaking beneath him, he noticed a boy sitting alone at the counter. The child could not have been more than 10 or 11 years old, with sandy brown hair that fell across his forehead in an unkempt mess. He was hunched over a plate of scrambled eggs, pushing the food around with his fork more than eating it. Something about the boy's posture caught Marcus's attention. There was a guardedness to the way he sat, shoulders curved inward as if trying to make himself smaller, invisible. Marcus had seen that posture before, in truck stops and diners across the country, in children who carried burdens far too heavy for their young shoulders. Doris appeared with a pot of coffee and a ceramic mug that had seen better days. She poured without asking, the dark liquid steaming as it filled the cup. "Know what you want, or do you need a minute?" Marcus tore his gaze away from the boy. "Give me the trucker's special. Eggs over easy, bacon crispy, hash browns well done." "Coming right up." Doris jotted the order on her pad and headed toward the kitchen, her comfortable shoes squeaking slightly on the linoleum. Marcus wrapped his hands around the warm mug, letting the heat seep into his fingers. He took a sip, wincing slightly at the bitter strength of the brew. It was exactly what he needed. As he drank, his eyes drifted back to the boy at the counter. The child had stopped pretending to eat and was now staring out the window, his face reflected ghost-like in the glass. In the growing morning light, Marcus could see dark circles under the boy's eyes, the kind that came from sleepless nights. His clothes, though clean, were too big for his thin frame, hanging loosely on shoulders that should have been filling out with the normal growth of adolescence. A man emerged from the restroom at the back of the diner, and Marcus watched as the boy's entire demeanor changed. The child's spine stiffened, his shoulders drew in even tighter, and he quickly resumed pushing food around his plate with feigned interest. It was a transformation so subtle that most people would not have noticed, but Marcus had spent decades reading people in brief encounters. It was a survival skill on the road, knowing who was trustworthy and who was trouble. The man was tall, perhaps 6'2", with a lean build and thinning hair combed over a growing bald spot. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, standard attire for this part of the country. His face was unremarkable, the kind that would blend into any crowd, but his eyes were cold, calculating. He walked to the counter and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and Marcus saw the child flinch, almost imperceptibly. "You finished that breakfast, Ethan," the man said, his voice carrying across the quiet diner. "We've got a long drive ahead." The boy, Ethan, nodded without looking up. "Yes, sir." There was something wrong here. Marcus could feel it in his gut, that instinct that had been honed by years of navigating dangerous situations on the road. The dynamic between the man and the boy was off, like a picture hung slightly crooked on a wall. Most people would walk past without noticing, but once you saw it, you could not unsee it. The man sat down on the stool next to Ethan, leaving a gap between them that seemed deliberate. He ordered coffee from Doris, who had returned from the kitchen, and pulled out his phone, scrolling through it with practiced disinterest. Ethan continued to eat mechanically, his movements robotic, his eyes fixed on his plate. Marcus's food arrived, and he thanked Doris with a distracted nod. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bacon crispy just as he had requested, but he found his appetite diminished. He ate slowly, keeping his attention on the pair at the counter while trying not to be obvious about it. 20 minutes passed. The diner began to fill with the morning rush, such as it was in this remote location. A group of farmers came in, their conversations loud and jovial as they discussed weather patterns and crop prices. A family with 2 young children occupied a booth near the back, the parents looking exhausted as they tried to manage their energetic offspring during a road trip. The man at the counter finished his coffee and stood, pulling a wallet from his back pocket. "Let's go, Ethan. Time to hit the road." The boy slid off his stool, and as he did, his sleeve rode up his arm. Marcus saw it clearly, a brief flash before the fabric fell back into place. Bruises. Dark purple marks circling the boy's thin wrist, the kind of bruises that came from being grabbed too hard, held too tight. And above them, fading to yellow and green, older marks that told a story of repeated injury. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. His mind flashed back 20 years, to a different diner in a different state, to a different child with similar marks. He had not acted that time, had convinced himself it was not his business, that he was probably misreading the situation. He had driven away and spent the next 2 decades wondering what had happened to that child, carrying the weight of his inaction like a stone in his chest. Not this time. "Hey!" Marcus called out, his voice louder than he intended. Both the man and the boy turned to look at him. "Hey, kid, come here for a second." The man's eyes narrowed. "We're in a hurry." "Just a second." Marcus stood, his considerable height and broad shoulders commanding attention. He was not an intimidating man by nature, but years of physical labor had given him a presence that was hard to ignore. "I think I know your dad. From the Tulsa Distribution Center. You work there, right?" It was a gamble, a way to separate the boy from the man, to get a closer look at those marks. The man hesitated, suspicion warring with the need to maintain whatever facade he was presenting to the world. "I don't work in Tulsa," the man said carefully. "You've got me confused with someone else." "Nah, I'm sure of it." Marcus walked toward them, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "Let me get a better look at you." The man took a step back, positioning himself between Marcus and the boy. "I said we need to go. Come on, Ethan." But Ethan had not moved. He was looking at Marcus with an expression that broke the truck driver's heart. It was hope, fragile and terrified, the kind of hope that had been disappointed so many times it hardly dared exist anymore. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said softly, dropping to one knee to be at eye level with the child. "Hot morning, isn't it? Why don't you take off that jacket?" The reaction was immediate. The man grabbed Ethan's arm right over those bruises and pulled him backward. "We're leaving. Now. Take your hands off that boy." The words came out harder than Marcus intended, decades of regret and anger condensing into a single command. The other patrons in the diner fell silent, conversations dying mid-sentence as they sensed the sudden tension. "Who do you think you are?" The man's voice was quiet, dangerous. "This is my son. Mind your own business." "Is that true, Ethan?" Marcus kept his voice gentle, his eyes on the boy. "Is this your father?" Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came out. His eyes darted between Marcus and the man, fear and confusion warring on his young face. In that hesitation, Marcus found his answer. Doris had moved behind the counter, her hand resting near the phone. The farmers had stopped their conversation, watching the scene unfold with growing concern. The family with the children had gathered their kids close, sensing that something was very wrong. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Marcus said, rising slowly to his full height. "Take your hands off that boy." "Or what?" The man's lip curled into a sneer. "You're going to call the cops? Go ahead. This is my son. I have documentation. You're just some trucker who can't mind his own business." "Then let's see that documentation. Let's call the police right now and sort this out." Something flickered in the man's eyes. It was quick, barely perceptible, but Marcus caught it. Fear. The man was afraid of the police, afraid of what official scrutiny might reveal. "Doris," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off the man. "Call 911. Already on it, honey." The waitress had the phone to her ear, her voice low and urgent as she spoke to the dispatcher. The man's grip on Ethan tightened, and the boy let out a small whimper of pain. "We're leaving," the man said, starting to back toward the door, dragging the child with him. Marcus moved to block his path. He was not a violent man, had avoided physical confrontation for most of his life, but he was not going to let this child disappear out that door. "Nobody's leaving until the police get here. Get out of my way." "No." The standoff lasted an eternity, compressed into seconds. The man's eyes darted around the diner, calculating his options. The other patrons had risen from their seats, a wall of concerned citizens blocking any alternate escape routes. This was rural Oklahoma, a place where people still looked out for each other, where community meant something. The man's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. The fight drained out of him as he realized there was no easy way out of this situation. He released Ethan's arm, and the boy immediately scrambled away, taking refuge behind the counter where Doris gathered him into a protective embrace. "You don't understand," the man said, his voice changing, becoming plaintive, reasonable. "His mother abandoned him. I'm just trying to get him to his grandmother's house. He's been acting out, making things difficult." Marcus had heard every excuse in the book over his years on the road. He had learned to recognize the particular cadence of lies, the way people tried to reframe their actions in the most favorable light. "Then you won't mind explaining that to the police," he said flatly. The wail of sirens in the distance provided the soundtrack to what followed. 2 patrol cars pulled into the parking lot, their lights flashing. Officers entered the diner, hands resting cautiously on their belts as they assessed the situation. Marcus stepped back, letting the professionals take over. He gave his statement, explained what he had seen, what had made him suspicious. The other patrons corroborated his account, describing the man's behavior, the boy's obvious fear, the bruises glimpsed when sleeves rode up. When an officer knelt in front of Ethan and asked him to show his arms, the boy hesitated. His eyes found Marcus's across the diner, seeking permission or perhaps courage. Marcus gave him a small nod. Slowly, Ethan rolled up his sleeves. The bruises were worse than Marcus had feared. They extended from wrists to elbows, a roadmap of suffering in varying stages of healing. Some were fresh, dark purple and angry. Others were older, faded to sickly yellow and green. There were marks that looked like fingers, places where skin had been broken and scabbed over, evidence of prolonged and repeated abuse. The diner fell silent. Doris pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The farmers who had been so jovial earlier now wore expressions of grim determination. The mother from the family held her own children tighter, her face pale. The man who had been so confident minutes before now sat handcuffed in the back of a patrol car, his protestations of innocence falling on deaf ears. Marcus watched as a female officer wrapped a blanket around Ethan's thin shoulders, speaking to him in soft, reassuring tones. A child services worker had been called and was on the way. The boy was safe, at least for now. One of the officers approached Marcus, a notepad in hand. He was young, probably mid-20s, with the serious demeanor of someone new to the job, but committed to doing it well. "Sir, I need to ask you a few more questions." Marcus nodded, feeling suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the accumulated fatigue of his long drive and the emotional weight of what had just transpired. "How did you know something was wrong?" the officer asked. Marcus thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "His eyes," he finally said. "The way he carried himself. Kids aren't supposed to be that scared. They're not supposed to flinch when someone puts a hand on their shoulder." The officer wrote this down, nodding slowly. "You did the right thing, sir. A lot of people would have looked the other way." "I looked the other way once," Marcus said quietly. "A long time ago. I wasn't going to make that mistake again." After giving his contact information and a detailed statement, Marcus was finally free to go. His breakfast sat cold and congealed on his table, but he had no appetite for it. He left cash to cover the bill and a generous tip, then headed for the door. "Wait." The small voice stopped him in his tracks. He turned to find Ethan standing behind him, the shock blanket still wrapped around his shoulders, a child services worker hovering protectively nearby. "Thank you," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody ever thank you." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He knelt down, meeting the child's eyes. "You're going to be okay now, Ethan. These people are going to take care of you. You don't have to be scared anymore." How did you know? How did you know to help me?" It was a question Marcus would carry with him for a long time. How do you explain to a child that sometimes adults see things they should not ignore, that sometimes being in the right place at the right time is about more than luck? "Because that's what people should do," he finally said. "We look out for each other. And when you're grown, you'll do the same thing. You'll help someone who needs it, because you'll remember what it felt like to need help yourself." Ethan nodded solemnly, as if making a promise he intended to keep. The child services worker gently guided him away toward a car that would take him somewhere safe, somewhere he could begin to heal. Marcus watched them go, then walked to his truck. He climbed into the cab, started the engine, and sat for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. The radio crackled to life, dispatchers coordinating loads and drivers checking in from across the country, the normal rhythm of life on the road. But nothing felt normal. Marcus had spent 30 years driving these highways, had seen countless faces come and go, had passed through the lives of strangers like a ship passing through water. This morning, for the first time in a long time, he had stopped. He had seen something wrong and had refused to look away. He pulled out of the parking lot, pointing his rig toward the rising sun. The road stretched ahead of him, endless miles of asphalt and possibility. But now there was something new accompanying him on his journey. It was not peace exactly, but perhaps the beginning of it. The knowledge that he had done something that mattered, that one scared little boy would have a chance at a different future because a tired truck driver had paid attention. Marcus did not know what would happen to Ethan. He did not know if the child would recover from whatever trauma he had endured, if he would find a loving home, if the scars on his arms would fade to memories that no longer held power. But he knew he had given the boy something invaluable, the possibility of a different story. As the miles rolled by beneath his wheels, Marcus found himself thinking about all the anonymous faces he had passed over the years. The people pumping gas at lonely stations, the families in minivans on vacation, the workers at roadside diners serving coffee to strangers. How many of them carried hidden pain? How many were waiting for someone to notice, to care, to act? He could not save everyone. No one could. But maybe that was not the point. Maybe the point was to pay attention, to stay present, to be willing to step into the uncomfortable space between observation and action. Maybe it was about being the kind of person who would not drive away from a child's frightened eyes. The sun rose higher, burning off the morning mist, painting the Oklahoma landscape in shades of gold and amber. Marcus drove on, carrying with him the weight of what he had witnessed and the hope of what he had changed. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in many years, he felt like he was driving towards something rather than away. 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself in Memphis, Tennessee, sitting in the cramped office of his dispatch company while his truck was being serviced. He was drinking bad vending machine coffee and scrolling through his phone when it rang, displaying an Oklahoma area code. "Mr. Thompson, this is Detective Angela Rodriguez from the Cimarron County Sheriff's Department. I was the lead on the case involving Ethan Miller." Marcus sat up straighter, his heart quickening. "Yes, Detective. Is everything okay?" "More than okay, actually. I wanted to personally thank you for what you did that day. Because of your intervention, we were able to uncover something much bigger than one case of child abuse." Marcus listened as Detective Rodriguez explained what their investigation had uncovered. The man at the diner, whose name was Carl Rennick, was not Ethan's father. He was not even a relative. He was part of an interstate operation that preyed on vulnerable children, identifying kids in difficult family situations and exploiting them. Ethan had been taken from a group home in Arkansas 3 weeks before that morning at the diner. His mother had lost custody due to drug addiction, and his father was unknown. He had been in the foster system since age 6, bounced between homes, and had finally ended up in a group facility where oversight was minimal and children could slip through the cracks. Carl Rennick had posed as a distant relative, presenting falsified documents to gain custody of Ethan. It was a scheme he had perfected over years, selecting children who had no one looking for them, no one who would raise an alarm when they disappeared. Because you stopped them when you did, Detective Rodriguez continued, Ethan was able to provide crucial information that led us to other victims. We've made 7 additional arrests across 4 states. 12 children have been recovered and returned to safety. Marcus closed his eyes, the magnitude of what she was saying washing over him. 12 children, because he had trusted his instincts, because he had refused to look away. "How is Ethan doing?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "That's actually the other reason I'm calling. Ethan has been asking about you. He's been placed with a wonderful foster family here in Oklahoma, people who specialize in caring for children who have experienced trauma. He's started therapy, he's enrolled in school, and he's making progress, but he keeps asking if he can talk to the truck driver who helped him." "Of course. Yes. Whatever he needs. Would you be willing to participate in a video call? His therapist thinks it might help him with closure, to see that you're real, that what happened wasn't a dream." Marcus agreed immediately, and they arranged a time for the following week. After hanging up, he sat in the dispatch office for a long time, staring at the wall without seeing it. 12 children, 12 futures that might have been lost, now recovered. All because he had paid attention to a boy who flinched when touched. The video call happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus had parked his truck at a rest stop outside Nashville, using his phone's hotspot to connect to the video conference. The image on his screen showed a bright room with colorful artwork on the walls, and in the center of the frame, Ethan Miller sat next to a woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair. "Hi, Marcus," Ethan said, and the truck driver was struck by how different the boy looked. There was color in his cheeks now, and though wariness still lingered in his eyes, it was tempered by something that looked like hope. "Hey, buddy. It's good to see you." "This is Mrs. Patterson," Ethan said, gesturing to the woman beside him. "She's my foster mom. She makes really good pancakes." Mrs. Patterson smiled warmly. "Ethan has told me so much about you, Mr. Thompson. We wanted to thank you personally for what you did." They talked for nearly an hour. Ethan showed Marcus his room, a space filled with books and a telescope he'd received as a birthday gift. He talked about school, about the friends he was starting to make, about the therapy sessions that were helping him understand that what had happened was not his fault. "My therapist says I'm brave," Ethan said, his voice soft but steady. "But I think you're the brave one. You didn't even know me, but you helped anyway." Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "Bravery isn't about not being scared, Ethan. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. You've been braver than you know just by surviving, and now you get to figure out who you want to be." "I want to help people," Ethan said with sudden conviction. "Like you helped me. I want to be the kind of person who notices when something's wrong and does something about it." "You will be," Marcus assured him. "I know you will." After the call ended, Marcus sat in his truck as the Tennessee twilight descended around him. The rest stop was quiet, just a few cars passing through on their way to somewhere else. He thought about all the roads he had traveled, all the miles he had logged, all the forgettable days that blurred together into years. This was why he drove. Not for the money, though he needed it. Not for the solitude, though he sometimes craved it. He drove because the road was where life happened, where strangers crossed paths and sometimes, in those brief intersections, changed each other's trajectories forever. Marcus started his engine, checked his mirrors, and pulled back onto the highway. There were still miles to cover, loads to deliver, schedules to keep. The rhythm of the road called to him, familiar and constant. But something had shifted. He drove now with his eyes a little more open, his attention a little more focused on the faces he passed, because you never knew. You never knew when you might be the only person who noticed, the only one willing to act. You never knew when a few minutes of attention, a moment of courage, might ripple outward into consequences you could never imagine. The road stretched ahead, endless and full of possibility. And Marcus Thompson drove on, carrying with him the knowledge that even in a world of anonymous highways and fleeting connections, one person's choice to pay attention could change everything. 6 months after that morning at the Golden Spoon Diner, Marcus received a letter. It arrived at his sister's house in Kansas City, where he kept a permanent address for occasions just like this. She called him while he was driving through Nebraska, her voice curious. "You got a letter from some kid in Oklahoma," she said. "Pretty fancy envelope. Want me to open it?" "Go ahead." He heard the paper rustling, then his sister's sharp intake of breath. "Marcus, you need to pull over for this one." He found a truck stop a few miles ahead and parked in the back lot, away from the rumble of other engines. His sister had scanned the letter and sent it to his phone. As he read it, the cab of his truck seemed to fade away, leaving only the words on the screen. "Dear Mr. Thompson, my name is Ethan Miller, but you probably remember me from the diner. My therapist says writing letters is good for processing feelings, so I wanted to write to you and tell you some things. Before that day, I didn't think adults could be trusted. All the adults in my life either hurt me or didn't notice when I was being hurt. I thought that's just how the world was. I thought I would always be scared and alone. Then you came along. You were just some guy eating breakfast, but you saw me, really saw me, and you didn't look away. I've been thinking a lot about that moment when you asked me to take off my jacket. I was so scared. I thought if people saw the bruises, they would think I was bad, that I deserved what was happening to me. That's what Carl always said, that I was bad, and that's why I got hurt. But when you saw you didn't think I was bad, you got angry, but not at me. You got angry for me. I didn't even know that was possible, for someone to be angry on your behalf. Mrs. Patterson, my foster mom, says I'm making good progress. I'm going to therapy twice a week, and I have a doctor who's helping me with some health issues I had because of not being taken care of properly. I'm in 6th grade now, and my favorite subject is science. I like learning about how things work. The other kids at school don't know what happened to me, and that's okay. My therapist says I get to decide who knows my story and who doesn't, but I wanted you to know that I'm doing better, that what you did mattered. I know I said thank you that day at the diner, but I don't think I really understood what I was thanking you for. Now I do. You gave me a chance to have a normal life, to find out who I am without being scared all the time. That's worth more than thank you can ever say. My therapist suggested I tell you what I want for my future, so here it is. I want to finish school. I want to go to college and study something that helps people. Maybe become a teacher or a social worker, or maybe a police officer like Detective Rodriguez. I want to be the person who notices like you were. Mrs. Patterson says I can ask if you might want to stay in touch. She says she would be happy to help me write more letters if you want to receive them, but only if you want to. I understand if you're too busy driving all over the country. Thank you again, Mr. Thompson. Thank you for seeing me. Your friend, Ethan Miller, P.S. I drew a picture of your truck. Mrs. Patterson helped me look up what kind it was so I could get it right. I hope it looks okay. Marcus scrolled down to see the drawing. It was a remarkably detailed rendering of a Peterbilt 579, done in colored pencil with obvious care. The red and white colors were accurate, down to the chrome exhaust stacks and the distinctive grille. In the driver's window, a small figure was visible, hand raised in a wave. He sat in his truck for a long time, looking at that drawing. Then he pulled out his phone and dictated a response to his sister, asking her to write it down and mail it for him. "Dear Ethan, your letter is one of the best things I've ever received in my whole life. I'm going to keep it in my truck and read it whenever I'm having a hard day. I'm so proud of you. Everything you're doing, the therapy, the school, thinking about your future, that takes real courage. Don't let anyone ever tell you different. I would love to stay in touch. I would love to get more letters and hear about how you're doing. You can write to me anytime you want, about anything you want. I'll write back every time, I promise. Your drawing is amazing. You got every detail right. I'm going to hang it in my cab where I can see it while I drive. You asked me once how I knew to help you. The truth is, I almost didn't. A long time ago, I saw another kid who looked scared like you did, and I didn't do anything. I drove away and let myself believe it wasn't my business. I thought about that kid every day for 20 years, wondering what happened to him, wishing I had been brave enough to stop. When I saw you, I had a choice. I could drive away again, or I could finally do the right thing. It was scary, Ethan. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just knew I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. You're going to face choices like that in your life. Moments where you can look away or step in. When those moments come, I hope you'll remember how it felt to have someone notice you, and I hope you'll be brave enough to notice someone else. I believe in you. I believe you're going to do amazing things. And I'm honored to be your friend. Take care of yourself, buddy. Your friend, Marcus Thompson, P.S. If you ever want to learn about trucks, I know a lot about them. Just saying. The letter marked the beginning of a correspondence that would continue for years. Every few weeks, Marcus would receive an envelope at his sister's house filled with Ethan's updates about school, his therapy progress, his growing interest in science, his observations about the world around him. Marcus would respond with stories from the road, descriptions of places he visited, life lessons learned from 30 years of driving, and always, always encouragement. But there was something Marcus did not tell Ethan. Something he could not put into words. The truth was that the boy had saved him too. For years, Marcus had been driving in a kind of fog, going through the motions of his life without really feeling present in it. His wife had left him a decade ago, tired of being married to a ghost who was always on the road. His daughter was grown and had her own family now, and though they talked on the phone, there was a distance between them that felt insurmountable. Marcus had been coasting toward retirement with no real plan, no real purpose. Just more miles, more nights alone in truck stops, more sunrises watched through a windshield with no one to share them with. He had been lonely in a way that went beyond physical isolation, lonely in his soul. That morning at the Golden Spoon, Dinah had changed everything. It had reminded him that his choices mattered, that paying attention mattered, that he was not just a machine for moving freight from one place to another. He was a human being with the power to affect other human beings. In the months that followed, Marcus found himself connecting more with the people he encountered on the road. He learned the names of the regular waitresses at his frequent stops, asked about their families, remembered details from previous conversations. He started calling his daughter more often, making efforts to bridge the gap that had grown between them. He even reached out to his ex-wife, not to rekindle their relationship, but to acknowledge his part in its failure and to wish her well. It was not a dramatic transformation. Marcus was still a truck driver, still spent most of his time alone on the highway. But there was a new quality to his solitude now, a sense of purpose that had been missing before. Every face he saw could be someone who needed help. Every interaction was an opportunity to make a positive difference, however small. 1 year after the incident at the diner, Marcus received a phone call that would change the direction of his life once again. "Mr. Thompson, this is Detective Rodriguez. I have some news about the Rennick case. Marcus pulled his truck off the road to focus on the conversation. What is it? The trial is scheduled for next month. The prosecutor wants to know if you'd be willing to testify. Your account of that morning is crucial to establishing the timeline and demonstrating Rennick's behavior. Marcus agreed without hesitation. He arranged his schedule around the trial dates, something he had never done for anything in his career. His dispatcher grumbled about the inconvenience, but Marcus held firm. Some things were more important than delivery schedules. The trial took place in a courthouse in Oklahoma City, an imposing stone building that smelled of old wood and paper. Marcus sat in the witness stand, his hands steady despite the nervousness churning in his stomach, and recounted the events of that October morning. He described what he had seen, what had made him suspicious, the moment Ethan's sleeve had ridden up to reveal those damning bruises. Carl Rennick sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a suit that did not quite fit, his face carefully blank. But when Marcus's eyes met his across the courtroom, he saw something there that satisfied him. Fear. The same fear that had flickered across Rennick's face that morning in the diner when he realized his schemes were unraveling. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, testimony from the other children who had been recovered, forensic analysis of Rennick's computers, financial records showing a network of money transfers. The defense tried to poke holes in the case, but there were too many witnesses, too much corroboration, too many broken children whose stories painted a consistent picture of systematic abuse. Marcus was in the courtroom when the verdict came down. Guilty on all counts. Multiple consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Marcus felt something release in his chest, a tension he had been carrying since that morning in the diner. Justice. It was an abstract concept until you saw it happen, until you watched a man who had hurt children be held accountable for his actions. It did not erase what had happened, did not heal the trauma those children had endured. But it was something. It was a line drawn in the sand, a statement that such actions had consequences. After the trial, Marcus was approached by a woman he did not recognize. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes and prematurely grey hair that she wore in a practical shortcut. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Sarah Chen. I work for a non-profit organization called Highway Watch. We train truckers to recognize and report signs of human trafficking and child abuse." Marcus listened as she explained the program. Commercial drivers covered more miles and saw more of America than almost any other profession. They were in a unique position to spot things that others might miss, to be the eyes and ears of the highway. What happened with Ethan is exactly the kind of intervention we train people to make, Sarah said. But most drivers don't know what to look for. They don't trust their instincts, or they don't know who to call. We're trying to change that. How? Marcus asked. Training sessions at truck stops and distribution centers, partnerships with law enforcement agencies across the country, a hotline that drivers can call if they see something suspicious. She paused, studying his face. We could use someone like you, Marcus. Someone who's been through it, who can speak from experience about why it matters. It was not something Marcus had ever considered. He was just a truck driver, a man who had spent his life in the cab of a big rig, no special skills, no platform. But, as Sarah spoke, he began to see possibilities. I'm not much of a public speaker, he admitted. You don't have to be polished. You just have to be real. Your story, what you did for Ethan, that's what will resonate with other drivers. They'll see themselves in you. They'll believe that they could do the same thing. Marcus thought about it for a long time after that conversation. He thought about all the truck stops he passed through, all the rest areas and diners and gas stations where stories unfolded invisibly. How many Ethans were out there right now, hiding their bruises, hoping someone would notice? 3 months later, Marcus gave his first presentation at a driver training session in Dallas. His hands shook as he stood before a room of 50 truckers, men and women, who looked at him with skepticism born from years of mandatory safety videos and compliance training. But when he started talking about Ethan, about that morning in Oklahoma, the skepticism faded. He showed them the drawing the boy had made of his truck, now laminated and worn from being handled so often. He read excerpts from Ethan's letters, the story of a child's recovery told in his own words. He talked about the guilt he had carried for 20 years before that day, the memory of another child he had not helped. By the end of the presentation, hardened truckers were wiping their eyes. They asked questions, real questions about what signs to look for, what numbers to call, how to intervene safely. Marcus did not have all the answers, but he knew people who did, and he made sure every driver left with resources and information. That first presentation led to another, then another. Word spread through the trucking community, and requests came in from companies across the country. Marcus adjusted his driving schedule to accommodate the speaking engagements, turning down some loads to ensure he could make his commitments. It was not the life he had imagined for himself. But then again, neither was that morning at the Golden Spoon Diner. Life had a way of presenting unexpected opportunities, and sometimes the best thing you could do was say yes. 2 years after the incident, Marcus stood in the parking lot of the Golden Spoon Diner once again. It was October, almost the same date, and the Oklahoma morning was cool and crisp, just as it had been that day. He had made a point of stopping here on this anniversary, a private ritual that felt important. The diner looked the same, its neon sign still flickering uncertainly, its white walls still yellowed with age. Doris was still behind the counter, though she moved a little slower now, and she recognized Marcus the moment he walked through the door. "Well, look who it is," she said, her weathered face breaking into a wide smile. "The famous truck driver." Marcus laughed, embarrassed. His story had made local news when Ethan's case went to trial, and Doris had been interviewed about the events of that morning. She had become something of a local celebrity, the waitress who had called 911 and helped save a child. "Just passing through," Marcus said, taking a seat at the same booth he had occupied 2 years ago. "Thought I'd stop in for old time's sake." Doris brought him coffee without being asked, the same strong black brew that had fortified him that long-ago morning. "I always think about that boy," she said, setting down the mug. "Ethan, do you know how he's doing?" "I do, actually." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her recent photos that Mrs. Patterson had sent. Ethan at a science fair holding a blue ribbon next to a project about renewable energy. Ethan with a group of friends at a birthday party, grinning at the camera with the unguarded joy of a normal kid. "Oh, my word," Doris breathed, pressing a hand to her heart. "Look at him. He looks so happy." "He is. He's doing really well. Got straight A's this year, thinking about what high school he wants to go to." They talked for a while, Doris filling him in on the changes at the diner and the town, Marcus sharing stories from his speaking engagements. The morning traffic came and went, truckers and farmers and travelers passing through on their way to somewhere else. As Marcus was finishing his breakfast, a young family came into the diner, a mother, a father, and a little girl, maybe 7 years old. They took a booth near the back, and Marcus watched them interact with the automatic awareness that had become second nature since that day. The family was fine, more than fine. The father was making silly faces to make his daughter laugh, and the mother was watching them both with an expression of tired contentment. It was just a normal family, stopping for breakfast on a road trip, creating memories they would carry with them. But Marcus watched anyway. Because you never knew. Because paying attention cost nothing and might save everything. Because somewhere out there, another child was waiting for someone to notice, and maybe this time, or the next time, or the time after that, Marcus or someone he had trained would be there to see. He paid his bill, leaving a generous tip as always, and headed for the door. Doris called out after him, "You take care of yourself, Marcus Thompson, and don't be a stranger." "I won't," he promised. "See you next year." Outside, the Oklahoma sun was climbing higher, burning off the morning chill. Marcus walked to his truck, parked in the same spot it had occupied 2 years ago. He climbed into the cab, started the engine, and sat for a moment, letting the familiar vibrations settle into his bones. On the dashboard, held in place by a piece of tape, was Ethan's drawing of the Peterbilt 579. Beside it was a photo of Marcus at one of his speaking engagements, surrounded by truckers who had just completed Highway Watch training. And next to that, a handwritten note from his daughter that had arrived last month, thanking him for reconnecting and inviting him to Thanksgiving dinner. Marcus looked at these things, these small pieces of evidence that his life had meaning, had impact, had connection. Then he put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot, heading for his next destination. The road stretched ahead, endless as always, but Marcus Thompson was not just driving anymore. He was paying attention. He was making a difference. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. 5 years passed, 5 years of miles and presentations and letters and slowly building something that felt like legacy. Marcus had become a recognized figure in the trucking industry, not famous exactly, but known. His story was included in training materials. His face appeared on posters at truck stops. Young drivers approached him at rest areas, telling him how his presentation had changed the way they saw the road. But the most important relationship remained the one with Ethan. The boy was 15 now. Tall and lean, with a quick smile that bore little resemblance to the frightened child Marcus had seen that morning in the diner. He was thriving in high school, excelling in his classes, playing on the junior varsity basketball team. The Pattersons had formally adopted him 2 years ago, giving him a permanent home and a family that loved him. They communicated regularly now, not just through letters, but through phone calls and video chats, and the occasional in-person visit when Marcus's route took him through Oklahoma. Mrs. Patterson, whose first name was Helen, had become a friend in her own right, updating Marcus on Ethan's progress and sending him photos of important milestones. Marcus was there when Ethan gave a speech at his school about overcoming adversity, watching from the back of the auditorium as the teenager spoke with poise and clarity about his journey from victim to survivor. He did not tell the whole story. He did not mention the specific horrors he had endured, but he talked about the importance of not giving up, of finding help when you need it, of becoming the person you want to be, regardless of where you started. After the speech, Ethan found Marcus in the parking lot. "You came," he said, his voice cracking slightly in the way that teenagers' voices do. "Wouldn't have missed it, buddy." They hugged, something that had taken years to become comfortable for Ethan. Physical touch had been difficult for him, associated with pain and fear. But he had worked through it in therapy, had learned to accept and even seek out the comfort of appropriate human contact. "I talked to my counselor about colleges," Ethan said as they walked toward Helen's car. "She thinks I could get scholarships, maybe even to some really good schools." "Of course you could. You're smart and you work hard. Any school would be lucky to have you." "I've been thinking about what I want to study." Ethan hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Social work, maybe counseling. I want to work with kids who went through what I went through, help them the way I was helped." Marcus felt a swell of pride that was almost paternal. This was what he had hoped for, what he had seen in Ethan from the beginning, the capacity to transform pain into purpose, to use his own suffering as a bridge to understanding others. "I think that's exactly right," Marcus said. "I think you'd be amazing at it." They reached Helen's car, and she greeted Marcus with a warm hug. The Pattersons had invited him to stay for dinner, and he had accepted, his schedule deliberately cleared for this occasion. As they drove through the Oklahoma streets, Ethan chattering about his classes and his friends and his plans for the summer, Marcus looked out the window at the passing scenery. 5 years. It seemed like both an eternity and an instant. So much had changed, and yet the fundamental truth remained. One moment of attention, one decision not to look away, had set all of this in motion. He thought about the other children who'd been saved because of that morning, the 12 who were recovered in the immediate aftermath, and the many more who had been helped because of the awareness programs Marcus now championed. He thought about the truckers he had trained, the thousands of professional drivers who were now watching the road with new eyes, ready to notice what they might have missed before. Ripples. That was what it was like. A stone thrown into still water, creating circles that expanded outward, touching shores you could never have imagined. Dinner at the Pattersons was a warm, chaotic affair. Helen had cooked enough food for twice as many people, a habit born from years of fostering children who had known hunger. Bill Patterson, Ethan's adoptive father, regaled Marcus with stories from his work as a contractor, his booming laugh filling the modest dining room. And at the center of it all was Ethan, no longer the scared boy pushing food around a plate, but a confident teenager helping to clear dishes and arguing good-naturedly with his father about basketball statistics. After dinner, Marcus and Ethan sat on the back porch, watching the Oklahoma sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was cool, carrying the promise of winter, but neither of them moved to go inside. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said after a long, comfortable silence. "Anything. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day? If you had just finished your breakfast and driven away?" It was a question Marcus had asked himself many times over the years. He had never been able to come up with an answer that did not fill him with a cold dread. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. We can't change what happened, only what happens next." "I think about it," Ethan said quietly. "I think about how close I came to disappearing, to becoming another kid nobody ever found. And then I think about how different everything is now, and it feels like a miracle." "Not a miracle," Marcus said gently. "Just people doing what they should do, me noticing something was wrong, Doris calling 911, the officers taking it seriously, your foster family giving you a home, your therapist helping you heal." "It wasn't one thing, Ethan. It was a lot of people, all choosing to do the right thing." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing this. "That's what I want to be. One of the people who chooses right." "You already are," Marcus assured him. "Every day you get up and go to school, every time you help someone who's struggling, every moment you refuse to let what happened define you. You're choosing right over and over again." The sunset faded to twilight, and the first stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear Helen and Bill laughing about something, the comfortable sounds of a family at ease with each other. "Thank you, Marcus," Ethan said. "Not just for that day, for everything since. For the letters and the calls and the visits, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." "You don't have to thank me," Marcus replied, his throat tight with emotion. "Being part of your life has been one of the best things that ever happened to me. You saved me too, you know." Ethan looked at him with surprise. "How?" "I was lost before that morning, just going through the motions, driving because I didn't know what else to do. You gave me a purpose, a reason to pay attention, to care, to try to make things better. Every good thing I've done since that day started with you." They sat in silence for a while longer, two people whose lives had intersected at a crucial moment and had been intertwined ever since. The bond between them was not quite friendship, not quite family, but something unique. Forged in crisis, strengthened by time, and built on a foundation of mutual respect and care. Eventually, the evening chill drove them inside. Marcus said his goodbyes, promising to call when he reached his next stop, promising to attend Ethan's basketball games when his schedule allowed, promising to keep writing those letters, even though they also texted now. As he drove away from the Patterson house, Marcus watched the lights recede in his rearview mirror. Somewhere in that house, a 15-year-old boy was doing homework, or playing video games, or just being a normal teenager. And that normal life, that precious ordinary existence, was something Marcus had helped make possible. He drove through the night, following highways that had become as familiar as the lines on his own palms. The radio played softly, a mix of country and classic rock that had been the soundtrack to his career. And in the glow of the dashboard, Ethan's drawing of the Peterbilt 579 kept him company, a reminder of everything he had gained by simply choosing to notice. Marcus Thompson was 62 years old when he finally decided to retire from driving. His body was telling him it was time, the accumulated strain of decades on the road manifesting in aching joints and a back that protested every morning. His company offered him a generous pension, grateful for his years of service and the positive attention his Highway Watch involvement had brought them. He settled in Oklahoma, of all places. Not in the same town as the Pattersons, but close enough that visits were easy. He bought a small house with a big garage where he could work on cars, a hobby he had always wanted to pursue but never had time for. The transition was not easy. After 30 years of constant movement, staying in one place felt strange, almost wrong. He found himself restless in the early weeks, walking the perimeter of his property like a caged animal, reaching for keys that led to a truck he no longer drove. But gradually he adapted. He joined a community garden, discovering a talent for growing tomatoes that would have surprised his younger self. He volunteered at a local veterans center, finding common ground with other men who had spent their lives in service of something larger than themselves. He continued his work with Highway Watch, traveling to speaking engagements by car, now instead of incorporating them into his routes. And he maintained his relationships. Weekly dinners with the Pattersons, regular calls with his daughter, who had finally forgiven him for his absence during her childhood and welcomed him into her family as an involved grandfather. Even occasional correspondence with his ex-wife, who had remarried but still appreciated hearing from him on birthdays and holidays. Ethan graduated from high school with honors. Marcus sat in the audience beside Helen and Bill, cheering as the young man walked across the stage to receive his diploma. 3 months later, he helped load boxes into Ethan's car as the boy prepared to leave for college, a state university with a strong social work program that had offered him a full scholarship. "You're going to do great," Marcus said, closing the trunk on the last box. "Remember everything you've learned. Trust your instincts and call me whenever you need to." Ethan hugged him tightly. "I will. I promise." Then he got in his car and drove away, toward his future, toward the life he had almost been denied. Marcus watched until the car disappeared around a corner, then stood in the driveway for a long time, feeling the weight of years and the lightness of hope. 10 years after that morning at the Golden Spoon Diner, Ethan Miller received his master's degree in social work. Marcus was there, of course, older and grayer, but still recognizable, still carrying himself with the quiet dignity of a man who knew his own worth. The graduation ceremony was held on a sunny May afternoon, the kind of perfect weather that felt like a blessing. When Ethan's name was called, he walked across the stage with the same poise he had shown at his high school speech, his eyes finding Marcus in the crowd and holding for just a moment. Afterward, at the celebration dinner, Ethan stood to make a toast. "Most of you know my story," he said, looking around at the assembled friends and family. "You know where I came from and how I got here. But there's someone I want to talk about tonight, someone who made all of this possible." His eyes found Marcus. 25 years ago, I was a scared kid in a diner, trying to be invisible, hoping no one would notice me. And then this truck driver looked at me, really looked at me, and he saw the truth. He saw that something was wrong, and he didn't look away. Marcus felt tears pricking at his eyes, but he did not look away. He held Ethan's gaze, remembering that morning, remembering the child who had flinched at every touch. "Marcus Thompson taught me that paying attention is an act of love," Ethan continued. "That noticing someone's pain and choosing to do something about it is the most powerful thing a person can do. He didn't know me. He had no obligation to help me, but he did it anyway, because that's who he is." He raised his glass. "To Marcus, for seeing me, for saving me, for showing me who I want to be." The room echoed the toast, glasses raised in honor of a man who had never sought recognition but had found it anyway, in the gratitude of a child he had once rescued, and in the ripples that continued to spread from that single act of attention. Later that night, Marcus and Ethan sat together in a quiet corner of the restaurant, the noise of the celebration fading around them. "I got a job offer," Ethan said, "a non-profit that works with victims of trafficking and abuse. They want me to lead their youth services program." "That's wonderful," Marcus said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "You'll be amazing. It's because of you, all of it, everything I've become, everything I'll do. It started with you." Marcus shook his head. "It started with you, Ethan. Your strength, your resilience, your determination to heal and grow. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it." "Either way," Ethan said, "I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to do for other kids what you did for me. Opening doors, paying attention, refusing to look away." "That's all anyone can do," Marcus replied. "One person at a time, one moment at a time. You never know which moment is going to matter, so you treat them all like they might." They sat in comfortable silence, two men connected by a bond that transcended conventional relationships. The boy who had been saved and the man who had saved him, both transformed by the experience, both better for having known each other. Outside, the night was calm and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Somewhere out there, Marcus knew, someone was in trouble. Someone was waiting to be noticed, hoping for rescue, praying for a miracle that would come not from divine intervention, but from human attention and human courage. And somewhere out there, a trucker was pulling into a roadside diner, tired from hours on the road, ready for a hot meal and a moment of rest. Maybe they would notice something. Maybe they would see a child who flinched, or a bruise that should not be there, or a dynamic between people that felt wrong, and maybe, just maybe, they would remember a story they had heard. About a truck driver in Oklahoma who paid attention, about a boy whose life was saved because someone refused to look away. And maybe they would make the same choice. 15 years after that fateful morning, Marcus Thompson passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 77 years old, surrounded by family and friends who loved him. His daughter was there, and his grandchildren, and the Pattersons, and of course, Ethan. The funeral was held at a small church in Oklahoma, the pews filled with an unlikely congregation. Truckers in press shirts and uncomfortable dress shoes sat beside social workers and community activists. Old friends from Marcus's driving days mixed with the new friends he had made in retirement. And scattered throughout were people Ethan did not know. Men and women who had been touched by Marcus's story, who had come to pay their respects to a man who had taught them the value of paying attention. Ethan delivered the eulogy. "Marcus Thompson was many things," he began, his voice steady despite the grief that weighed on his heart. "He was a husband and a father, a truck driver who logged millions of miles, a speaker who trained thousands of people to recognize the signs of trafficking and abuse, a volunteer who gave his time to those in need." He paused, looking out at the assembled mourners. "But to me, he was the man who saved my life. Not through any grand heroic gesture, but through the simple act of paying attention, of seeing a scared boy in a diner and refusing to look away." The church was silent, everyone present caught up in the weight of the moment. Marcus taught me that courage is not about being fearless, it's about being afraid and acting anyway. He was afraid that morning, afraid of confrontation, afraid of being wrong, afraid of what might happen if he got involved. But he did it anyway, because he knew it was right. Ethan looked at the coffin, decorated with flowers and photographs of the man who had changed his life. He used to say that we never know which moments are going to matter. That's why we have to pay attention to all of them. Treat every interaction as if it might be the one that changes everything. He took a breath, steadying himself. Marcus changed everything for me. And I know I'm not the only one. Every person he trained, every presentation he gave, every conversation he had about the importance of noticing, all of those touched lives in ways we'll never fully know. The best way to honor Marcus, Ethan concluded, is to carry on his work, to pay attention, to notice the people around us, to refuse to look away when something is wrong. He showed us that one person can make an enormous difference, not through wealth or power, but through simple human attention and courage. Rest in peace, Marcus. You've earned it. After the funeral, Ethan stood alone by the grave as workers began to fill it in. The Oklahoma wind carried the scent of freshly turned earth, a smell that would forever remind him of endings and beginnings. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn piece of paper, carefully unfolded. It was the first letter Marcus had written to him all those years ago, responding to the letter Ethan had sent from the Pattersons' house. Because that's what people should do. We look out for each other. Ethan read the words one more time, then folded the letter carefully and returned it to his pocket, where it would stay close to his heart. He had work to do. There were children out there who needed help, families that needed support, systems that needed changing. The fight against trafficking and abuse was far from over, and Ethan was committed to being on the front lines for as long as he was able. But for now, in this moment, he allowed himself to grieve, to remember the man who had changed his life, to feel the weight of gratitude and loss and love all mingled together. A hand touched his shoulder, and he turned to find Helen Patterson beside him, her eyes red from crying. She did not say anything, just stood there, offering her presence as comfort. Together, they watched the grave fill in, the earth slowly covering the coffin that held a man who had made a difference. A truck driver from Kansas City who had learned too late in life what it meant to pay attention, and who had spent his remaining years making sure others learned the lessons sooner. The sun began to set, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and purple that had colored so many of Ethan's evenings in Oklahoma. The air cooled, and eventually the workers finished their task, leaving behind a neat mound of fresh earth that would settle over time. Ethan placed a hand on the gravestone, feeling the cool granite beneath his palm. The inscription was simple: Marcus Thompson, beloved father, grandfather, and friend. He paid attention. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, "for everything." Then he turned and walked away, toward his car, toward his work, toward the rest of his life. Behind him, the cemetery lay peaceful in the gathering dusk, one more name added to the countless others who had lived and died in this corner of the world. But Marcus Thompson's name would not fade into obscurity. It would live on in the training programs he had helped create, in the people he had inspired, in the children who were saved because truckers learned to pay attention. And it would live on in Ethan, who carried with him every day the lessons learned from a chance encounter at a roadside diner. Pay attention. Notice what others miss. And when you see something wrong, do not look away. 20 years after that morning at the Golden Spoon Diner, Ethan Miller stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a conference on child welfare. He was 41 now, his sandy hair streaked with gray, his face carrying the lines of a life spent in difficult work. "When I was 10 years old," he began, his voice amplified throughout the grand ballroom, "I was a victim of human trafficking. I was taken from a group home in Arkansas by a man who pretended to be a relative. For 3 weeks, I lived in terror, not knowing what would happen to me, not believing anyone would help. The audience was silent. Hundreds of professionals who had dedicated their careers to protecting children, all focused on the man at the podium. Then, at a diner in Oklahoma, I met a truck driver named Marcus Thompson. He noticed that something was wrong. He paid attention to the way I flinched, to the bruises on my arms, to the fear in my eyes, and he refused to look away. Ethan told the story he had told many times before, but it never lost its power. The confrontation in the diner, the arrival of the police, the moment when Ethan finally believed he might be safe. Marcus Thompson saved my life that day. But more than that, he showed me what it means to be a good person, not through grand gestures or heroic acts, but through simple human attention, through noticing, through caring. He looked out at the audience, seeing faces young and old, all united in their commitment to protecting vulnerable children. The work we do is hard. It's heartbreaking. There are days when it seems like the problems are too big, the systems too broken, the suffering too great. On those days, I think about Marcus. I think about what he taught me. One person can make a difference. One moment of attention can change a life. We cannot save everyone, but we can save someone. And every someone matters. Ethan paused, gathering himself for the conclusion. Marcus passed away 5 years ago, but his legacy lives on in everyone he touched, everyone he trained, everyone he inspired. And it lives on in me. I stand before you today not as a victim, but as a survivor. Not as someone who was saved, but as someone who saves others. And I will spend the rest of my life honoring the man who gave me that chance. Pay attention. That's what Marcus would tell you. Pay attention to the children in your communities, in your schools, in the diners and truck stops and parking lots. Pay attention to the ones who flinch, the ones who seem afraid, the ones who are trying to be invisible. Because somewhere out there right now, a child is waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to care, waiting for their own Marcus Thompson. He raised his head, looking directly into the audience. Let's make sure they find one. The applause that followed was thunderous, a wave of sound that washed over Ethan and carried with it the hopes and commitments of everyone in the room. He stepped back from the podium, overwhelmed by the response, grateful beyond words for the path that had led him here. After the speech, he was approached by a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with nervous energy and determined eyes. "Mr. Miller, I'm sorry to bother you, but I had to tell you something." "You're not bothering me," Ethan assured her. "What is it?" 6 years ago, I was in a bad situation. A man who said he was helping me get a job, but it wasn't what he said. I was at a bus station in Texas, and this trucker, he noticed something was wrong. He called the hotline, the Highway Watch one, and they found me. They got me out. Ethan felt his breath catch. "I'm so glad you're okay." "I'm more than okay," the young woman said, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm about to graduate from law school. I'm going to work for an organization that helps trafficking survivors because of what happened to me, because someone paid attention. That's wonderful. That's exactly how it should work. I just wanted you to know," she continued, "that the story you told about Marcus Thompson and what he did for you, that story is my story too. Different names, different places, but the same truth. One person paying attention can change everything." Ethan reached out and took her hand. "Keep paying attention," he said. "Keep noticing. The ripples you create will spread further than you can imagine." They stood together for a moment, two survivors connected by similar experiences, by the same lesson learned from different teachers. Then the young woman thanked him and disappeared into the crowd, off to continue her own journey, her own mission to pay attention and make a difference. Ethan watched her go, thinking about Marcus, about the morning at the diner, about all the years that had passed since. The world was still full of darkness, still harboring people who preyed on the vulnerable, still allowing children to fall through the cracks. But it was also full of light, full of people who paid attention, who noticed, who refused to look away. Truckers and waitresses and ordinary citizens who understood that their vigilance could save lives. That was Marcus Thompson's legacy. Not monuments or institutions, but a simple truth passed from one person to another, an idea that spread like ripples on water. Pay attention. Ethan left the conference and stepped out into the Washington evening. The Capitol dome was lit against the darkening sky, a symbol of a nation that still struggled to protect its most vulnerable members, but was also capable of extraordinary goodness. He had meetings tomorrow and the day after that. Legislation to discuss, programs to fund, systems to reform. The work never ended, but that was okay. It was not supposed to end. It was supposed to continue, person by person, moment by moment, each act of attention building on the last. Somewhere out there, a truck was rolling down a highway, its driver keeping watch through tired eyes. Somewhere, a child was waiting to be noticed. And somewhere, a voice was saying what Marcus Thompson had taught Ethan to believe, the words that had become the foundation of his life's work. Pay attention. That's what people should do. We look out for each other. And when you see something wrong, do not look away. The end.